My name is Natalie. I am 34 years old, and I have been trying to figure out how to write this for the better part of 6 months. I've started and deleted this post probably 11 times. I write a few paragraphs, close the tab, tell myself it doesn't matter, convince myself that talking about it only gives it more power, then wake up at 3 in the morning staring at the ceiling and think, no, it does matter, and someone out there needs to hear it, and maybe that someone is me. So I'm going to write it, all of it, from the beginning. And I'm going to be honest in a way that I haven't been able to be with most people in my life, because the internet is strange and anonymous, and sometimes it's the only place where honesty feels survivable. Let me tell you about the worst night of my life, and then let me tell you about the phone call that almost broke me 5 years later, and then let me tell you about the thing in between, the years between the wound and the scar, because that part is the part nobody ever talks about, and it's the part that saved me. Part 1, the night everything fell apart. I was 29 years old and 11 weeks pregnant when I started bleeding on a Thursday evening in November. I remember the exact date, November 14th. I remember it because that morning I had gone to the grocery store and bought a small pumpkin that was on clearance from Halloween, and I thought, this is silly, but I'm going to put it on the kitchen counter as a little decoration until the baby comes asterisk. And I remember standing in the checkout line, holding this stupid little pumpkin, feeling so full of something that I didn't have a name for. Hope, maybe. The particular kind of hope that feels fragile and enormous at the same time, the kind you carry very carefully because some part of you already knows how heavy it is. I put the pumpkin on the counter. I made dinner. I sat down to watch television with my then husband, a man I will call simply by the letter J, and somewhere around 8:30 in the evening I went to the bathroom and found blood, and my entire world shifted 3 inches to the left in a way that it never fully shifted back. I'm not going to describe the physical details in graphic terms, because that's not what this story is about, and also because I think anyone who has experienced pregnancy loss already knows what those details feel like from the inside, and anyone who hasn't doesn't need to know them in order to understand what I'm telling you. What I will say is that I knew immediately that something was very wrong, that my body was telling me something I did not want to hear, and that I was afraid in the specific, animal way you are afraid when the danger is already inside you and there is nowhere to run. Jay drove me to the hospital. It was 22 minutes away. I know this because I watched every minute tick by on the dashboard clock, and I counted, the way you do when you're trying to hold yourself together with math. 22 minutes. I didn't cry in the car. I felt like I was made of glass. The emergency room at 11 weeks on a Thursday night is a particular kind of waiting room purgatory. There are people with broken things, broken arms, broken ribs, broken something you can't see. There are people who look like they've been there for a very long time and have stopped believing that anyone is coming. There are fluorescent lights that make everyone look like they're already halfway to somewhere else. I sat in a chair with my coat still on, and Jay sat next to me, and I held his hand so hard I think I was probably hurting him, but he didn't say anything. They called me back eventually. They ran tests. A nurse with very kind eyes and purple scrubs did an ultrasound, and her face told me the answer before anyone said a word, and I think I knew before she even pressed the wand to my skin, but knowing doesn't protect you from the moment of confirmation. It just means you see it coming. It doesn't mean it hits any less hard. The doctor was gentle. He used words like asterisk, incomplete asterisk, and natural process, and very common in the way that people use those words when they are trying to be kind but also technically accurate, and I sat on the paper-covered table and nodded at all of it, and felt like I was watching the whole scene from somewhere above the ceiling tiles. Jay was in the room with me. He held my hand again. He looked pale and sad, and also, I noticed, a little like he didn't know what to do with himself. They told me I would need to stay for a few hours of monitoring. They explained what was happening and what would happen next and what to watch for. They moved me to a quieter room, smaller, dimmer, with a chair for Jay next to the bed and a window that looked out onto a parking garage. I was handed a paper cup of water and a warm blanket, and a nurse who said she would check on me every 30 minutes. This is the part of the story I have never told anyone in full, not my therapist, not my best friend, not the 1 or 2 people in my life I trust with almost everything, because this part is the part that, when I try to say it out loud, makes me feel like I'm asking people to believe something that shouldn't be believable. Jay's phone rang. It was his mother. He stepped out into the hallway to take it. He did not come back. Not in 5 minutes. Not in 15. After 20 minutes I pressed the call button and asked the nurse if she had seen him in the hallway, and she looked at me with an expression I have spent 5 years trying to forget, the kind of expression that means I know something you don't, but I'm not going to be the one to tell you asterisk, and she said she would check. She came back and told me he had gone to the parking garage. She said it gently, like a person handing someone a bomb. I called him, he answered. He told me his mother had needed him, that she was having some kind of health scare, that he had to go, that I would be fine because the doctors were right there, and there was nothing he could do anyway, and these things happen to women all the time, and he was sorry, but his mother needed him more right now. I want you to read that again. I'm going to say it one more time. His mother needed him more right now. I was losing our baby. I was alone in a hospital room, and he left. I didn't scream at him. I don't remember what I said actually. I think I said something like okay, and then I hung up and I lay in that dim hospital room with the parking garage window and the warm blanket and the 30-minute nurse checks, and I stared at the ceiling for what felt like a very long time. And then, because I am someone who, even in crisis, reaches for the people I love, or the people I thought loved me, I called my mother. My mother, let me tell you about my mother, because you need to understand her before you can understand what happened next. My mother, whose name is Beverly, and I'm using her real name because she will never read this, and also because I think real names matter, because they make the people in stories real, and she is very real, is a woman who has always believed that the most important thing in any situation is how it looks. Not how it feels, not what it means, how it looks. She was raised this way. Her mother was raised this way. There is a whole lineage of women in my family who learned early that the world rewards composure and punishes need, so they became expert at appearing fine while quietly drowning, and they passed this skill down like a family heirloom, generation to generation, wrapped in tissue paper and presented with a smile. My mother loves me. I have never doubted that she loves me, not really, not at the bottom of everything. But the love she has for me has always been shaped by what she believes I should be rather than who I actually am. It is a love that comes with blueprints attached. She loves who she made me to be, or who she believes she made me to be, and when the real me diverges from the blueprint, which it often does, the love gets complicated. It gets conditional in ways she would never acknowledge because she doesn't believe conditional love is love, and she believes her love is unconditional, and so she has never had to examine the conditions. I called her from that hospital room at 11:30 at night. She answered immediately, which surprised me. I told her what was happening, quickly, the way you say terrible things when you're trying to get through the saying of them, and there was a silence on the line, and then she said, "Oh, sweetheart, that's very upsetting. Are you going to be okay?" I said I didn't know. She said, "Well, the doctors are there, aren't they? They'll take care of you." I said yes. She said, "Do you need us to come?" I said, "Yes, please, I need you to come." There was another silence. "It's very late," she said, "and your father has his thing in the morning. He has that breakfast meeting, the one with the Rotary Club." I want to be very precise about this, because I know how it sounds and I want you to understand that I am not exaggerating. My mother's exact reason for not coming to the hospital where her daughter was alone and losing a pregnancy was that my father had a breakfast meeting with the Rotary Club. I said, "Mom, I'm alone. Jay left. I'm in the hospital by myself and I'm losing the baby and I need someone to be here with me." She said, "Oh honey, I'm sure you'll be fine. You're strong. You've always been so strong. And these things, they happen, they really do. It's so common, I've read about it. It's just one of those things. Try to sleep. Call us in the morning when you know more." I said, "Mom, please." She said, "Get some rest, Natalie. You'll feel better in the morning." And she hung up. I put the phone down on the blanket next to me. The window showed the parking garage, and the parking garage was grey and lit with yellowish lights. And somewhere in that parking garage, my husband had gotten into our car and driven away. And somewhere in a house 40 minutes from here, my parents were going to sleep in their bed because my father had a breakfast meeting in the morning. I lay in that hospital room completely alone. I was 29 years old. My body was in the process of ending a pregnancy I had wanted so badly that I had bought a pumpkin and put it on the kitchen counter. And nobody came. The nurse with the kind eyes came for her 30-minute check and found me crying quietly, the way you cry when you've learned that crying loudly doesn't bring anyone, and she pulled a chair up next to my bed and she sat with me. She didn't say anything for a little while, she just sat there. And then she said very quietly, "You shouldn't be alone right now." "I know," I said. "Is there anyone I can call for you?" I thought about my friends. My friend Penelope, who would have come, but who lived an hour away and had 2 small kids, and I couldn't ask her to leave them in the middle of the night. My friend Dara, who I hadn't talked to in a few months because life had gotten complicated. My co-worker Angie, who I liked but wasn't sure knew me well enough for this asterisk. I ran through the contacts in my phone in my head and kept arriving at the same answer. There is no one who should have to be called to do this. There is one person whose job this is. His name is Jay, and he is in the parking garage driving home. And there are 2 other people whose job this is. Their names are Beverly and Robert, and they are going to sleep because of the Rotary Club. "No," I said, "thank you, I'll be okay." She sat with me for a while anyway. I don't know how long. She checked my vitals. She refilled my water. Before she left, she squeezed my hand once and said, "I'll be back in 30 minutes, with an emphasis on "I'll be back" that I understood was her way of making a promise, a small one, the kind that is all she had to give, and I was grateful for it in a way I still feel, all these years later. I stayed in that hospital until 4 in the morning. Then they discharged me with paperwork and a follow-up appointment card, and a list of things to watch for, and I took a taxi home because I didn't have a car and I didn't call Jay to come get me, and I walked into our apartment, and the pumpkin was still on the kitchen counter, and I sat down on the floor in the kitchen, and I finally cried the way I'd been holding back all night, and it was the most alone I have ever felt in my entire life. Part 2, the earthquake nobody sees. Here is something nobody tells you about surviving something that breaks you. The breaking doesn't look like anything from the outside. I went back to work the following Monday. I looked fine, I answered emails, I laughed at things, I attended meetings, I had the follow-up appointment. The doctor confirmed what had happened and told me I was physically recovering well and gave me pamphlets about grief resources that I put in my bag and threw away when I got home. Jay and I didn't talk about the hospital. Not really. He apologized in the morning when he came back. He sat at the kitchen table and said he was sorry and it wasn't his finest moment and his mother had been really scared and he hadn't been thinking clearly. He said it in the way people apologize when they have decided the apology is more for them than for you, when they need to say it so they can put it behind them, when the apology is less about your pain and more about being done with the guilt. I said it was okay. I said it was okay because I didn't know yet that it wasn't, because I hadn't yet understood that the night in the hospital was not a single bad event, but a revelation, a moment in which several people who were supposed to love me showed me, all at once and without ambiguity, exactly what I was worth to them in a moment of genuine need. It took me months to understand what I had seen that night. It took me longer than that to admit what it meant. My mother called the next morning like she'd said she would. She asked how I was feeling. She said these things happen to so many women, you know, it's really very common. She mentioned that her friend Donna's daughter had gone through something similar and was now perfectly fine and had 2 lovely children. She said the important thing was not to dwell. She said I was young and healthy and everything would work out. I said okay. I said okay so many times in those months that the word started to feel like a key that unlocked nothing. Okay, a door without a room behind it. Okay. My father sent a text, not a call, that said, "Heard you had a rough night. Hope you feel better soon. Love, Dad." It was formatted like a greeting card inside of a text message, like he had dictated it to someone or copied it from somewhere, and it had the particular emotional warmth of a cable bill. My parents did not come to see me. Not that week, not the week after. At Thanksgiving, 2 weeks later, we went to their house for dinner and my mother asked if I was feeling more myself and I said yes and she said good, and we ate turkey and the subject was not raised again. My father did not mention it at all. The whole visit felt like a stage set with all the props in place and something important missing from the script. A crucial scene that had been cut, but that everyone could feel the shape of, this negative space where the real conversation should have been. Jay and I limped along for another 14 months before the marriage collapsed in the way that things collapse when they were already structurally unsound, and something heavy gets placed on top of them. The pregnancy, the loss, was not the only problem, not by a long way. But it was the night I understood, on some level I wasn't yet ready to name, that I was married to a man who, when given the choice between being there and being gone, would choose gone. And once you see that about someone, it is very hard to unsee it. We separated in February. The divorce was finalized the following October. It was not dramatic. It was quiet in the way that the end of something can be quiet when both people are exhausted and have run out of things to fight about, and the fight has become the relationship, and removing the fight means there is nothing left. We divided our things with a kind of careful fairness that felt almost like tenderness, the last thing we ever did gently together. I moved into a one-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood I had always liked but never lived in. I had a small living room and a kitchen with good light, and a bedroom that was entirely mine, and for the first few months I lay in that bed every night and felt the particular largeness of a space that is only yours, half terrifying and half something else, relief, maybe, or the beginning of something that might eventually become relief. This is where the earthquake metaphor comes in. When an earthquake hits, the ground shakes and things fall and there is visible devastation. Everyone can see the earthquake happened. They bring aid, they call, they come. But there is another kind of devastation that happens afterward in the months and years when the visible shaking has stopped, when the buildings have been assessed and declared structurally sound and everyone has gone back to their lives and the real damage reveals itself. Cracks in foundations. Walls that held but shifted. A house that looks fine from the outside and will stand for years but has something wrong with it at the level of its bones. I was that house. On the outside, fine, functioning, even sometimes happy, or the early draft of happy, the kind that shows up in small moments in a good cup of coffee or a funny thing a friend says or an afternoon so clear and cold that just breathing the air feels like a gift. Those things were real. I don't want to make this sound like 5 years of unbroken suffering because it wasn't. Life doesn't work that way. Pain and joy are not mutually exclusive. They coexist always in ratios that shift. But underneath the cracks, I had trouble trusting people. This was not something I articulated to myself clearly. I didn't sit down and think I have trouble trusting people because of my parents and my ex-husband. It showed up in smaller, quieter ways. I was slow to ask for help. I was slow to let people in. When friends invited me to things, I sometimes cancelled at the last minute, not because I didn't want to go, but because there was a voice inside me that said, quietly, "What if you need them and they're not there?" And sometimes it was easier to be alone than to risk finding out the answer to that question. I dated a little. There was a man named Peter who was funny and kind, but who travelled constantly for work, and was never quite present even when he was in the room. There was a woman named Val, who I was briefly and intensely interested in, and from whom I learned that I was, perhaps, not as entirely straight as I had previously believed, a discovery that managed to be both a surprise and somehow not a surprise at all, which I think is how the most honest self-discoveries usually arrive. There was a year in which I dated nobody and focused on therapy and my work and decided that was enough, and for a while it was. I became very good at my work. I had always been good at it. I manage communications for a mid-sized non-profit that does climate-related advocacy, which sounds both important and incredibly vague, and is somehow exactly that, but in those years I became excellent at it, the way you become excellent at things when you pour all your redirected energy into them. I was promoted. I hired 2 people who reported to me. I won a small award from an industry organization that sits on my bookshelf and that I secretly am more proud of than I let on. My friendships got better too, slowly. Penelope and I got closer. I made a new friend, a woman named Isadora who I met at a reading series I started attending mostly to have somewhere to go on Wednesday evenings, and who turned out to be one of the funniest and most fundamentally decent people I've ever encountered. I started telling the truth, more small truths, then bigger ones, than the kind that feel like handing someone a piece of your actual interior. And with my family, with my parents, I developed a kind of managed distance that I told myself was healthy, and that was, I think, actually some percentage of healthy and some percentage of avoidance. I saw them at holidays. I called on Sundays sometimes when I could muster it. The calls were about logistics, their health, my work, the garden my mother was expanding, the trip my father was planning. We talked about everything except the things that mattered, and we did this so consistently, and for so long that the not talking became its own language, a whole vocabulary of skirted topics and carefully steered conversations and doors that were always slightly ajar and never opened. My mother, for her part, behaved as though the night in the hospital had not happened. Not in a pointed, deliberate way. She didn't acknowledge it and refused to discuss it, which would at least have been something. a presence you could push back against. She behaved as though it had not happened in the way that some people are capable of genuinely compartmentalizing things that are painful or inconvenient, filing them somewhere their conscious mind doesn't regularly visit. I don't know if she thought about it. I don't know if it crossed her mind in the years that followed. I never asked her. I was afraid of the answer in both directions, afraid she thought about it constantly and didn't know how to bring it up, and equally afraid she had forgotten it entirely. I never brought it up either. I was a house with earthquake damage I hadn't reported. I turned 30. I turned 31. I turned 32 and had a dinner party at my apartment with Penelope and her husband and Isadora and a couple of other people I liked. And Penelope brought a cake with a single candle shaped like a star because she said 32 felt like a constellation year, whatever that meant, and I blew it out and thought, I am okay. I am actually genuinely mostly okay. And I meant it. I wasn't performing it. I was arriving slowly at something like myself. 33, therapy twice a month with a woman named Dr. Adiz, who is Nigerian-American and ruthlessly perceptive, and has the gift of asking questions that land like keys turning in locks. With her I started excavating things I hadn't touched in years. The night in the hospital, my mother's voice saying try to sleep, Jay getting into the car in the parking garage, the particular quality of being alone when you are most not supposed to be. What do you think you needed that night? Dr. Adiz asked me once during one of our sessions. Someone to come, I said immediately. And what do you need now? I sat with that question for a long time. I don't know, I said. I think I need to stop being surprised that they didn't. She nodded. She has a way of nodding that is not agreement so much as asterisk yes, keep going. I think, I said, I need to stop waiting for them to apologize, because they're not going to. They don't even know they owe me one. They don't know that anything happened that requires one. And if they never apologize, then I have to decide what to do with that. And what do you want to do with it? I looked at the window in her office. Outside there was a tree that had just started its spring leaves, the bright new green of things beginning. I want to grieve it, I said, and then I want to be done grieving it, and I want to love them anyway from a safe distance without expecting them to be people they don't know how to be. Dr. Adiz smiled. She has a very specific small smile she does when she thinks something is significant. That sounds like a plan, she said. Part 3, The Dark Secret. Here is the thing I haven't told you yet. The thing that exists below the surface of everything I've told you, the thing I have to tell you now because the story doesn't make sense without it. My mother never wanted me to have that baby. Not because she didn't want grandchildren. She wanted grandchildren. She talked about grandchildren with a frequency and enthusiasm that, in retrospect, should have felt more complicated to me than it did. She had opinions about where we would raise them and how many we should have, and what activities she would do with them. She had a whole interior life already constructed around a future in which she was a grandmother. But she did not want this baby, not at this time, not in this way. Jay and I had not been married for very long when I became pregnant, 14 months, which my mother considered too soon. She had also, from the beginning of my relationship with Jay, had reservations about him that she expressed as observations, the way people with strong opinions about your choices express those opinions as neutral observations. He seems a bit lost, she said once early on. Very charming but not entirely settled. She was not wrong about this. She was, in fact, correct, and the fact that she saw it clearly before I did is one of the more complicated things about my relationship with my mother, the way her perceptions of me and the people in my life can be sharp and accurate and still arrive covered in judgment. Being right about something doesn't automatically make you kind about it. When I told her I was pregnant, her response was not enthusiastic. She asked how far along I was. She asked if we'd been trying or if it was a surprise. She asked, and I remember this very clearly, "Are you sure this is the right time?" I said yes, I was sure. She made a sound that was not quite agreement. In the weeks that followed, she asked several times whether Jay and I had talked everything through, and whether I was taking everything into consideration, and made comments about how having a baby really changes things in a relationship, especially a young one, and whether we were financially stable enough. These were not unreasonable questions. They were also not what you say to a daughter who is pregnant and happy about it. They were the questions of someone who wanted to introduce doubt, who was perhaps hoping I would arrive at the same conclusion she had, and make a different decision without her having to say explicitly that she wanted me to make a different decision. I don't know for certain that she wanted me to end the pregnancy. I'm not going to say she did definitively because I'm trying to be honest here, and honesty means not stating things as facts that are really interpretations. What I know is that she was not supportive. What I know is that her response to my pregnancy was measured and concerned and conditional where it should have been, where I needed it to be uncomplicated and warm. When I lost the pregnancy, I think there was a part of my mother that felt, at some level that she would never acknowledge even to herself, something like relief. Not because she wanted me to suffer, because she believed she had been right, and because she believed the universe had intervened in a way that aligned with what she would have chosen. I'm not saying she was glad. I'm saying she was not devastated. I'm saying that her lack of devastation, the ease with which she said these things happen and try to sleep, may have had something to do with the fact that, on some level, she had never fully let herself believe the pregnancy was going to lead somewhere she wanted it to lead. And there is a part of me, the part that has been in therapy for years and has done a lot of very uncomfortable interior work, that wonders whether she knew that some of her measured, concerned, doubtful response to my pregnancy had maybe, played some role in whatever dynamic caused Jay to become the kind of man who could leave his wife alone in a hospital room, because he had heard her reservations. Not directly, she was too controlled for that, but my mother has a way of communicating disapproval that doesn't require words. You absorb it. It gets into the air of a room. I think Jay, on some level, understood that my mother didn't fully endorse this baby, this pregnancy, this chapter of our lives, and I think that gave him not permission exactly, but something like it, some reduction of the moral weight of his choice. I'm not saying she caused what happened. I'm saying that nothing happens in isolation. I'm saying that a family has a weather system, and the weather affects everyone in it, and sometimes we don't even realize how much we've been shaped by weather we thought was just the air. When I finally said all of this to Dr. Adiz, not quickly, not easily, over many sessions, and with a lot of circling and a lot of resistance, and a lot of sessions where I started and stopped, she said, "How does it feel to say it out loud?" "Like opening a window in a room that's been closed for a long time," I said. "What's the smell?" I thought about it. "Not great," I said, "but at least it's air." Part 4, the people who saved me. I need to tell you about Cornelius before I tell you about the phone call. I need to tell you about Cornelius because he is the unexpected twist in this story, and because he is the reason I was able to handle the phone call the way I handled it, and because his story is intertwined with mine in a way that I think about often, the way two separate threads can get wound together by accident, by proximity, by a sequence of small coincidences that don't feel like accidents once you see where they lead. I met Cornelius 18 months before the phone call. He is a 67-year-old retired high school English teacher who lives in the apartment directly below mine. He has a beard that has gone almost entirely white and a habit of humming while he reads, and a small terrace where he grows tomatoes every summer and talks to them. Quietly, the way you talk to things you love, but that cannot answer. We met because his smoke detector went off at 2 in the morning, and I knocked on his door to make sure he was okay, and he was okay. He had forgotten about something he was heating on the stove, and he was so mortified about waking me up that he insisted on giving me a jar of his tomato sauce, which I didn't have the heart to refuse, and which turned out to be extraordinary. I wrote him a note about the tomato sauce. He slipped a note under my door saying he was glad I liked it. The notes continued. This sounds old-fashioned, and it was, deliberately, because Cornelius is someone who believes in the physical act of writing things down, in the intentionality of putting pen to paper, in the idea that something becomes more real when you commit it to a surface. We started having coffee sometimes, then sometimes on weekends. He told me about his late wife, Deborah, who had died 4 years earlier of a cancer that had been fast and brutal, and that he still clearly thought about every day, not with devastation anymore, but with the settled weight of a love that had nowhere left to go and so stayed. He told me about his daughter, who lived in Seattle and who he spoke to on the phone every Sunday and visited twice a year, and loved with an unambiguous, uncomplicated fullness that I found myself quietly astonished by. He told me about his students, 32 years of teaching, hundreds of students, and he spoke of them as a whole ecosystem, this vast accumulation of young people he had spent 3 decades trying to give something useful. He asked about me too in the way he did everything directly, without pressure, with genuine interest and no hidden agenda. And because there was something about him, the notes, the tomatoes, the lack of agenda, I told him more than I usually told people. Not everything at once, but more. One afternoon, about 3 months after we started having coffee, I told him about the night in the hospital. The whole thing, Jay leaving, my mother saying try to sleep asterisk, the nurse sitting with me because there was nobody else, the parking garage window and the warm blanket and the pumpkin on the kitchen counter. Cornelius listened without interrupting. When I was done, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I am sorry that happened to you. I am genuinely, deeply sorry." I started crying, not because what he said was extraordinary, it was, in fact, very simple, but because I had never heard those exact words from anyone. Not from Jay, not from my mother, not from my father or my friends or my ex-husband's family or anyone who knew the story. No one had ever said, "I am sorry that happened to you." They had said these things happen and you're so strong, and at least you know you can get pregnant, and a dozen other things that were all in their way attempts to comfort that didn't actually touch the wound. But Cornelius said the one thing that did, which was simply, "That was wrong. It shouldn't have happened. I'm sorry." I cried for a while. He sat across the kitchen table and waited. When I was done, he poured more coffee and asked if I wanted to talk about it more or just sit for a while, and I said just sit, and we sat, and it was the most not alone I had felt in years. I told him about the dark secret, my mother's ambivalence about the pregnancy. I told him what I suspected, the relief I thought I had perceived in her voice. I told him what I had figured out in therapy about the weather system of families. He listened to all of it, then he said something that changed how I thought about everything. He said, "I taught a lot of kids whose parents failed them. Some of those parents were cruel, some of them were neglectful, and some of them, the ones that were hardest for me to watch, were people who loved their children genuinely and completely in the only way they knew how to love, and their love still caused damage because the way they knew how to love was broken." "Which do you think my parents are?" I asked. "I think you already know," he said. I did know. They were the third kind, the broken love kind, the kind that is, in its own way, harder than the others because the cruelty of the first kind you can name and resist, and the neglect of the second kind has at least an identifiable shape. But the third kind, the broken love, is confusing, because the love is real, it is genuine, it sits right next to the damage, and sometimes it is impossible to separate them, to say this part is love and this part is harm, because they grow from the same roots, from the same story they were told about what love is and what it requires and what it costs. "Can you still love them?" Cornelius asked. "Yes," I said without hesitating. "I think that's the problem." He smiled. "No," he said, "I think that might be the answer." Isadora, my Wednesday reading series friend, contributed something different to my recovery, not the patience and depth of Cornelius, but a kind of fierce, irreverent clarity that cut through the more elaborate stories I told myself. Isadora is 38, a physical therapist who runs half marathons and swears like a sailor, and has the most accurate nonsense detector of anyone I have ever met. She does not tolerate self-pity, but she is ferocious about distinguishing self-pity from legitimate grief, which is a distinction a lot of people can't make, and it's one of the things I love most about her. "Tell me the story again," she said once, during a wine-fueled Friday night conversation that had gotten real in the way those conversations do. "The whole thing, don't summarize." So I told her all of it. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Your mother is terrified of need." "What?" "She is terrified of need, of needing and of being needed. That's why she said you were strong, because strong people don't need things, and if you're strong then she doesn't have to feel your need, and she doesn't have to feel her own. You need to understand that she didn't stay home because she didn't love you. She stayed home because she was scared." "Scared of what?" "Of you needing her and her not being enough, of the size of what you were going through, of sitting in that hospital and not knowing what to say and feeling useless. She opted out of discomfort and dressed it up as concern for your strength." I stared at her. "That's actually really astute." "I know, I'm very smart." She refilled her wine glass. "It doesn't make it okay, by the way. I'm not saying she was right. I'm saying she was afraid, and afraid people do terrible things and call it something else. And you're allowed to be furious about it and also understand it." This was the thing about Isadora. She could hold two things at once without having to resolve them. She could say this was wrong and here is why it happened in the same sentence without letting the second part excuse the first. It's a rare skill. Most people, when they try to explain something, accidentally forgive it. Isadora never confused explaining with forgiving, and she never let me either. There was also, over those years, my colleague Angie. Remember Angie, the co-worker I hadn't been sure knew me well enough for the hospital story. Who in the 3 years since had become someone who knew me very well indeed. Angie is a small, fierce, methodical woman who speaks in complete sentences and has opinions about everything and is almost always right. She and I have lunch every week, a standing Wednesday date at a Thai place near the office that has terrible lighting and perfect curry, and serves, as what I have come to think of as our weekly therapy session, except conducted over yellow curry instead of in a quiet office. Angie is the one who, over months of Wednesday lunches, helped me understand what I wanted my relationship with my parents to look like going forward, not the theoretical, therapeutic version of this question, not what should a healthy adult relationship with one's parents involve, but the actual, specific Natalie version. What do I want? What can I actually live with? What does love look like when you've stopped expecting it to look like something it has never been? You don't have to cut them off, she told me once. That's not the only option. You can love people from the exact right distance, like looking at something very bright, you don't stare at it but you don't have to close your eyes. The exact right distance, I repeated. Every relationship has one, she said. The trouble is finding it. The exact right distance. I've thought about that phrase so many times in the years since. It's become the framework I use for everything. Not absence, not full exposure. The exact right distance, calibrated to what I can handle and what is true and what keeps me, as Dr. Adiz would say, intact. And then there was the man who would become, eventually, the person I would let closer than anyone, since his name is Solomon, and he came into my life 18 months before the phone call, about the same time I met Cornelius, in that same season of my life when things were quietly, incrementally shifting in ways I wasn't fully aware of until I looked back. Solomon is 37 and works in urban planning, and is originally from Lagos and moved to this city for graduate school and never left, which he describes as a seduction that happened so slowly he didn't notice until it was complete. He is tall and laughs easily and reads voraciously, and has a relationship with his own family that is complicated and warm and imperfect and deeply present in a way that I found at first slightly daunting and then, slowly, revelatory. We met at Isadora's birthday party. We talked for 2 hours in a corner about a book we had both recently read, and then he asked for my number, and I gave it to him and spent the following week telling myself not to expect anything, and then he called, actually called, didn't text, and we went for dinner and talked for another 3 hours, and it was one of those evenings that folds into itself, that you walk out of wondering how it got to be midnight. He was patient with me. Genuinely patient, not the performance of patience while secretly hopping your speed up, but real patience, the kind grounded in the understanding that people arrive at closeness at different speeds, and that arrival is not the same as trust, and trust is not the same as love, and all of these things take time, and time is something he had. I told him about the hospital, eventually, later in our relationship than I might have, because with Solomon I found myself wanting to be sure before I handed him that particular piece of me. When I did tell him, he listened the way Cornelius had listened, completely, without interrupting, and at the end he was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "You built yourself back from that." "I'm still building," I said. "Yes," he said, "but look at the building." I'm still with Solomon. This is relevant to what comes next because it means I was not alone, not the way I had been alone for years, and not the way I was alone in that hospital room when the phone call came. Part 5, the phone call. November 14th. I know the same date. I noticed it when I looked at my phone that morning, 5 years exactly since the night in the hospital, and I thought I should mark this somehow, light a candle or something, write in my journal. It was a strange anniversary to have, one that had no external markers, no social scripts for acknowledgement. Pregnancy loss is full of those phantom anniversaries, dates that land on the calendar every year with the weight of what they carry, invisible to everyone but you. I was sitting on the couch with a cup of tea and Solomon was in the other room doing something with his laptop, and the apartment was quiet in the good way, the way of a shared quiet that doesn't need to be filled. My phone rang. "Mom." I looked at it for a moment. We didn't usually talk on Thursdays. I felt the small, involuntary tightening I still feel sometimes when my mother calls unexpectedly, the wondering what has happened, what she wants, what this will require of me, and then I answered. "Hi, Mom." Natalie, her voice was different immediately, softer than usual, and something underneath the softness that I didn't immediately identify. "Is everything okay?" I asked. I'm fine, she said quickly. "Nothing is wrong right now. I had a doctor's appointment yesterday, my cardiologist." My mother has had some heart issues, minor ones, managed well with medication, for the last several years. Nothing immediately alarming, but enough to make. I had a cardiologist appointment land with a particular weight. And I said, and he adjusted my medication and said everything is fine, but he wants me to be more careful. He had some forms for me to fill out, for the practice, just in case of an emergency. "Okay," I said. "One of the forms is the emergency contact form," she said. I waited, and I realized I didn't have one, a proper one. "Your father is on it, of course, but the secondary contact," she paused. "I thought I want to put you down as my emergency contact if that's all right." The silence that followed was mine. She had stopped talking and was waiting, and the silence was mine to do something with. I want to tell you what happened in my body in that silence, because this is the part of the story that is about what happens after everything else, after the wound and the years and the work and the people who helped you build yourself back. This is the part where you find out who you've become. My first physical response was to sit down. I was standing up. I had stood up at some point during the call without noticing, and I sat back down on the couch heavily, like something had gone out of my legs. My second response was a sound I didn't make out loud but that I felt internally, a sort of long breath of recognition, because I understood immediately, in the full complexity of the moment, everything that was happening. My mother was asking me to be the person she called when things went wrong. She was, in her way, naming me as the person she trusted to show up. She was asking me to be in the most literal possible form there. And she had no idea, none whatsoever, what she was asking. She was not asking with awareness of the irony. She was not asking in a spirit of apology or acknowledgement or reckoning. She was asking the way she did most things, practically, without fully understanding the emotional landscape she was walking through, without seeing the particular shape of the ground beneath her feet. My mother does not remember the night in the hospital the way I remember it. I believe this. I have come to believe it not as a way of excusing her, but as a way of accurately understanding her. For her, it was a night she made a particular decision, a decision that felt at the time in her framework within the logic of her world reasonable. Her daughter was at the hospital with doctors. Her husband had a mourning obligation. The situation was medical, not emotional, and medical situations had professional handlers. She told her daughter to sleep. She told her daughter she would call in the morning. That is probably the whole story she has of that night. A few lines, a sad situation handled sensibly. For me, it is the night the world shifted. It is the pumpkin on the counter and the parking garage window and the nurse sitting next to my bed. It is 29 years old and completely alone and learning, in real time, the exact boundaries of who would come for me and who would not. We have been having the same conversation, or rather the same non-conversation, from different rooms of the same house for 5 years. She doesn't know this. She thinks we're in the same room. In the silence after her request, sitting back down on my couch on November 14th, 5 years after the worst night of my life, I thought, this is the moment. This is it. This is where you find out who you've become. Part 6. What I said. Mom, I said. Yes. I breathed. There were many things I could have said. I have imagined in the years since the hospital saying all of them at various points. There is a version of me who would have said, "Do you remember where you were 5 years ago today? Do you remember what I called you about?" A version who would have said, "You told me to go to sleep. My husband had left and I was alone in the hospital and you told me to go to sleep." A version who would have said, "I would have died before I called you in an emergency, because I know what you do when someone needs you and it is not come." I didn't say any of those things, not because I was afraid and not because I didn't feel them, but because I had done something with them already. I had given them to my therapist and to Cornelius and to Isadora and to Angie and to Solomon and to the journal I keep and to the night ceiling of my bedroom and to November 14th itself, year after year. I had processed them, slowly and imperfectly, like the long work of composting something. I had turned them into something that was no longer just pain. I need you to understand something, I said, before I answer. My mother made a small sound of attention, listening. 5 years ago today, I said, I was in the hospital. I called you and I told you I was losing the pregnancy and I was alone and I asked you to come. Silence on her end, a long one. You said it was late and Dad had his morning thing, I said. You told me to sleep. I was in that hospital room alone until 4 a.m. More silence, I could hear her breathing. I have not told you this before, I said, because I didn't know how, or because I was afraid, or maybe because I thought if I said it something would break and I wasn't sure I had the energy to deal with the breaking. But I'm telling you now because you just asked me to be your emergency contact, and I want to answer you honestly, and to do that honestly I have to tell you the truth about what happened. I stopped, I waited. Natalie, she said, and her voice had changed. It was smaller, it had something crumpled in it. I'm not telling you this to hurt you, I said. I want you to know that I'm not interested in hurting you. I'm telling you because we have been talking past each other for 5 years and I swallowed. I'm tired, I love you and I am tired of talking to you from behind glass, and I think if we are going to be something real to each other, something that can actually show up when things get hard, then we have to start from the truth of what happened. My mother was quiet for a long time. I listened to her breathe. I didn't come, she said finally. It wasn't a question. She wasn't performing contrition, she was, I thought, actually revisiting the night, actually putting herself back in it. No, I said. I told you to sleep. Yes. Oh, Natalie. Her voice broke on the second syllable of my name, a crack right down the middle. Oh, sweetheart, I didn't. She stopped, started again. I'm trying to remember what I was thinking and I think I convinced myself you would be okay. I think I made it medical in my head instead of, she stopped again. Instead of human, I said. Yes, her voice was very quiet, instead of human. We sat in the silence together for a moment. On the other end of my phone, my mother was sitting somewhere in her house, probably the kitchen. She takes phone calls in the kitchen, and she was 62 years old, and she was looking at something she had not looked at in 5 years, maybe ever, some version of the night I had been looking at for the same 5 years from the other side. I should have come, she said. I know that, I can see that. I should have gotten in the car, your father's meeting it wasn't. She made a sound that might have been trying to be a laugh but came out as something else. The Rotary Club, I said, the Rotary Club. You did. Oh God, she said very quietly. It wasn't an exclamation, it was something more honest than that. It was the sound of seeing yourself. I felt something unlock in my chest. Not forgiveness, I want to be precise about this because I think precision matters here, because forgiveness is a word we use too loosely. We treat it like a single moment when it's actually a long practice, but the beginning of something. An opening, air into a room that had been closed. Mom, I said, I want to answer your question. She waited. I will be your emergency contact, I said. And I will come. If something happens, if you need me, I will come. Because that is what I believe you do for the people you love. You show up. You go to the parking garage and you get in the car and you go. A pause is. But I need you to understand that I'm asking for the same thing, I said. Not from that night. I'm not asking you to go back 5 years. I'm asking for right now. Going forward, I need you to be someone who comes. My mother was crying. I could hear it quietly, the careful sound of someone crying who has spent a lifetime learning not to cry where anyone can see. I want to be that person, she said. I know, I said, I believe you. I'm so sorry, Natalie. And this was different from the Rotary Club sorry, different from the it wasn't my finest moment sorry. This landed somewhere else. I'm so sorry. You were alone and you needed me and I wasn't there and I'm so sorry. I know, I said again. Can you, she stopped, started again. Can you tell me what it was like, that night? I want to hear it if you'll tell me. I sat with this for a moment. Could I tell her? Did I want to? I thought about the nurse with the kind eyes, the parking garage window, the warm blanket, the pumpkin. Yes, I said, I'll tell you. And I did. Part 7, the long work of going forward. I told my mother about the night in the hospital. All of it beginning to end, the whole story that I had kept behind glass for 5 years. I told her about Jay leaving and the parking garage window and the nurse sitting with me because there was no one else. I told her about the pumpkin on the counter and the 4 in the morning taxi and sitting on the kitchen floor. I told her I had never felt so alone, and I meant alone in the full, specific weight of that word. Not lonely, not sad, but genuinely, bodily, terrifyingly alone in the way you should never be when you are losing something irreplaceable. My mother listened. She didn't interrupt. She didn't say these things happen or you're so strong or at least asterisk. She listened in the quiet, attentive way of someone who has understood that the most important thing they can do right now is be present for what is being said. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment, then she said, "I failed you." "Yes," I said, simply, not cruelly. I wasn't interested in cruelty, but honestly. "Yes, you did." "I don't know," she paused. "I don't know how to undo that." "You can't undo it," I said. "But that's not what I'm asking for. I'm asking for now. I'm asking for what comes next." "Tell me," she said. "Tell me what you need from me now." This was the most extraordinary thing she had said, possibly in my entire life. Tell me what you need, not assuming, not guessing, not projecting what she thought I should need onto me. Tell me, a question, genuine, open, frightening. "I need you to see me," I said. "Not who you want me to be, me, the actual me with the actual life I have." "Tell me about your life," she said. "Tell me actually." So I told her. I told her about Solomon. She knew he existed, but had been given the brief, surface version. I told her about Cornelius downstairs and the tomato sauce and the notes and the Saturday coffees. I told her about Dr. Adiz and the work I had done in therapy and what I had learned about myself and about our family and about the weather system that formed me. I told her about Isadora and the Wednesday reading series and the things Isadora had said about fear and need. I told her about Angie and the Thursday lunches and the exact right distance. My mother listened to all of it, and occasionally she asked a question, not a deflecting question, not a redirect, but a genuine curiosity question, the kind that says I am actually here, I am following, I want to understand. At some point she said, "I was scared of your need." I stopped. What? That night, I'm thinking about it now, about what I was feeling, and I think I was scared. Scared of how big it was, what you were going through. Scared that if I came I would make it worse, that I wouldn't know what to say, that you'd need something from me I didn't have. And it was easier to make it manageable. To make it something the doctors were handling. To tell you to sleep. Isadora, I thought, she had seen it exactly. "I know," I said, "I think that's true." "That's not an excuse," she said quickly. "No," I agreed, "but it's a reason, and knowing the reason it helps a little." "Does it?" She sounded genuinely unsure. "It helps me not to think of you as someone who doesn't care," I said. "It helps me think of you as someone who was scared and made the wrong choice. Those are different things." She was quiet for a moment. "I do care," she said. "I care about you so much, Natalie. I know I haven't, I know that hasn't always, I know you haven't always felt." "I know, Mom," I said, and somehow in that moment I did know. I knew in the complicated, imperfect, earthquake-damaged way of knowing, not simple, not fixed, not resolved, but real. She cared. She had failed me in a moment that mattered immensely, and she cared. Both things completely true. We talked for another hour. My mother told me things she had not told me before, about her own mother, my grandmother, who had been cold and controlled, and who had taught her daughters that competence was love and neediness was weakness. She told me about a loss of her own, early in her marriage, before I was born, that she had never spoken about. A pregnancy, earlier than mine, ended the same way, that she had gone through largely alone, because that was how you went through things in her world, in her family, alone and without burdening others. She told me that when I called her from the hospital, she had felt something she couldn't name at the time, something that she thought now might have been her own old grief rising up, too big and too old and too buried to deal with at 11:30 on a Thursday night, and so she had done what she had been taught to do with things that were too big. She had put them away. "I put my grief on top of yours and called it practicality," she said. I held the phone against my ear and thought about weather systems, about how the weather that forms us gets passed down, generation to generation, and how it takes extraordinary effort and intention to change it. "I'm the generation that stops it," I said. "What?" "The pattern," I said. "The not coming when people need you, the being afraid of need, the making it manageable when it shouldn't be manageable. I'm the generation that stops it." My mother was quiet. "And I think," I said carefully, "that maybe you can help me. by changing what you can change now going forward. We can't fix the past, but we can change what we do from here. I want to, she said. I really do want to. Then start, I said. That's all, just start. Part 8, The Reckoning and the Rise. I need to be honest with you about what happened after that phone call, because this is not a story that ends with a single conversation and a transformation and everything healed. That's not how healing works. You don't have one conversation and emerge whole. You have one conversation that opens a door, and then you have to walk through the door, and the hallway on the other side is long and sometimes dark and sometimes confusing, and sometimes you have to stop and lean against the wall and catch your breath. The conversation with my mother opened a door. What followed was the long walk down the hallway. She called again a few days later. We talked for half an hour about nothing urgent, just checking in. How was Solomon? What was I reading? How were the tomatoes doing downstairs? Small things, but present things. She was there. She asked questions. She listened to the answers. She called again the following week. She started asking about Solomon, not in the interrogative, assessing way she had previously asked about people in my life, but with genuine interest. She wanted to know what he was like, what he cared about, what his family was like. She asked if she might meet him sometime. 2 months after the phone call, I drove to my parents' house for the first time outside of a holiday. Not Christmas, not Thanksgiving, just a Sunday, just dinner. Solomon came with me. My father, let me tell you about my father for a moment, because I have not been fair to him in this account, not because I want to protect him, but because he has always been in my family system, the quieter planet in the orbit of my mother's sun, and understanding him requires some separate attention. My father, whose name is Robert, is a gentle and largely conflict-averse man who loves my mother with a totality that occasionally blinds him to things he should probably see. He is not unkind, he is not cruel. He is, like many men of his generation, somewhat emotionally abbreviated, fluent in the language of practical assistance and deficient in the language of emotional presence, not because he didn't care, but because he was never taught the vocabulary. The text he sent me that said "heard you had a rough night" was the emotional equivalent, for him, of sitting with me for hours. He gave what he had. What he had was limited. I had needed more. At that Sunday dinner before we sat down to eat, I asked my father if we could talk for a moment, just the two of us, and we went out to the backyard. He's been building a small deck, this constant, years-long project that I think he works on partly because he loves it and partly because having a project means you always have somewhere to be, and I told him. Not everything, not the full hour-long conversation I'd had with my mother. The essential thing. I was in the hospital. I called. I needed you, you didn't come. My father turned a piece of wood over in his hands while I talked. He does this, handles things, keeps his hands busy. When he's processing something he doesn't know what to do with. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. I didn't know it was that bad, he said finally. I know, I said. Your mother, she made it sound like you were going to be fine. I know. If I'd known, he stopped, started again. If I had understood how bad it was, Natalie, I would have come. I want you to know that I would have. The Rotary Club, that's nothing. He shook his head. That's nothing. I believed him. I believe him still. There is a version of events in which my mother, handling the call in the way she always handled things that were too big, minimized it, maybe unconsciously, maybe in the framing she gave my father, and my father accepted that framing because accepting it was easier than pressing. And so both of them went to sleep that night in the genuine, partially self-deceived belief that their daughter was fine, was being handled, was going to be okay. I don't know if that absolves either of them. I don't think absolution is the point. The point is I'm trying to see them clearly, not as heroes or villains, not as innocent or guilty, but as people. Specific people with specific histories and specific fears and specific limitations. People who love me, people who failed me, people I am choosing with intention and effort and the exact right distance to continue to love. My father put down the piece of wood and looked at me. I'm sorry, Natalie, he said. I'm so sorry. I know, Dad, I said. He opened his arms. My father and I are not huggers, we never have been. Our family doesn't work that way. And so the hug he offered was awkward and a little stiff and entirely sincere, and I hugged him back, and we stood in the backyard next to the unfinished deck for a moment, and it was not a movie moment. It was not perfectly choreographed. It was just two people doing the imperfect, effortful work of being real with each other. Then he said, Your fella in there seems nice. Should we go eat? And we did. The dinner was good. Not perfect, these things rarely are, not the first time, not when the plate tectonics of a family are still settling. My mother talked a little too much about things that didn't matter, the nervous energy of someone trying. My father told a long story about the deck that went nowhere. Solomon, bless him, is a gifted conversationalist who can find the thread of genuine connection in almost any interaction, and he found several. He and my father talked about construction. Solomon knows absolutely nothing about construction, but asked excellent questions. He and my mother talked about a documentary they had both recently seen. He was warm and easy and present in a way that, I noticed, made my mother visibly relax. On the drive home, Solomon said, "They're trying." "I know," I said. "It's hard for them," he said. "You can see it, they're not sure how to do it differently." "No," I said, "but they're trying." He reached over and held my hand on the gearshift. "You're being very generous," he said. "I'm being pragmatic," I said. "I love them, they're trying, what else is there to do?" He glanced over at me. "How do you feel?" I thought about it honestly. About the drive there and the conversation about the deck and the dinner and my father's hug and my mother saying, "Tell me what you need." About the long walk down the hallway that had started with one phone call. "Cautiously hopeful," I said. "That's good," he said. "Cautious hope is still hope." Part 9, what I learned about kindness. This is the part where I want to talk about the nurse, because I have been circling back to her throughout this whole story, and I think she deserves to be named, not literally named, because I don't know her name but acknowledged. Given her full weight. The nurse who sat with me that night in the hospital was there for maybe 40 minutes total. She was working a night shift in an emergency room. She had other patients. She had other calls. She could have checked my vitals, refilled my water, said, "Let me know if you need anything," and gone back to the desk, and that would have been her job, fully and completely. She would have been doing nothing wrong. Instead, she pulled a chair up next to my bed and she sat with me. She stayed for a while. She said, "You shouldn't be alone right now." She squeezed my hand before she left. That's it, that's all she did. And I think about her more than I think about the people who left me. More than Jay driving to the parking garage. More than my mother saying try to sleep asterisk. More than my father's text that read like a greeting card. I think about her because what she did was so small and so enormous at the same time. The small, enormous thing of simply deciding to be present. Of looking at a person who was alone and in pain and saying, "Not on my watch. While I am here you will not be alone." She didn't fix anything. She didn't say the perfect words. She didn't take away the loss or the grief or the particular desolation of that parking garage window. She just sat there, and by sitting there she held something at bay that I think, had it been allowed to fully land that night, might have taken much longer to recover from. I have thought about her work in terms of what I try to do now. Not as a nurse, my profession is entirely different, but as a human being in proximity to other human beings who are going through hard things. I try to be the one who pulls up the chair. I try to ask asterisk, is there anyone I can call for you even when I suspect the answer is no, and I'm going to be sitting there anyway. I try to offer the thing that is in my power to give, even when it feels small, especially when it feels small, because I know from the inside of a hospital room at midnight that small things are sometimes everything. I think often about a conversation I had with Cornelius shortly after the phone call with my mother, when I was telling him about how the call had gone. He listened to the whole thing. I told him about I'm the generation that stops it and my father's hug and the Sunday dinner. And when I was done, he was quiet for a moment. "You know what I think the most important part of this whole story is," he said. "What?" "The nurse." I looked at him. "Everything else in this story," he said carefully. "Your parents, your ex-husband, the years of working things out, the phone call, all of that is very important and very real. But the nucleus of it, the thing at the center that everything else orbits around, is a woman who decided to pull up a chair. Because she set the standard, she showed you what it could look like, and you have spent 5 years becoming that person." I thought about this for a long time. "She saved me a little," I said. "Yes," he said, "she saved you a little, and now you go around saving other people a little. And so does she, through you, through the ripple of it, she's still sitting in chairs she doesn't even know about." The ripple of it, I've kept that phrase. Part 10, the betrayal I didn't see coming. I said at the beginning of this story that there would be a betrayal, And I have told you about the betrayals that were most obvious, Jay leaving the hospital, my parents not coming. But there is another betrayal in this story, one that is less dramatic and more insidious, and it is the betrayal I committed against myself. For years, for almost 5 years from the night in the hospital until the phone call, I told myself a story about what happened. Not the true story. A managed story. A story in which I was fine, in which I had processed things, in which I was strong and resilient and moving forward, and had accepted what happened with the kind of equanimity that suggests you are someone who has truly healed. I was so good at this story that I almost convinced myself it was true. I convinced myself that I had forgiven my parents, when what I had actually done was stopped expecting anything from them, which is not the same thing. I convinced myself that I had processed the grief of the pregnancy, when what I had done was filed it somewhere I didn't often visit. I convinced myself that I was in control of my life and my choices and my capacity for intimacy, when actually I was operating with a significant and largely unexamined fear of need, of my own need and of being needed, which are sometimes the same thing and sometimes opposites. I betrayed myself by telling myself the comfortable version of the story. The therapy helped, Dr. Adiz helped, Cornelius and Isadora and Angie and eventually Solomon helped, but I think the deepest help was the phone call itself, not what I said to my mother, but what I said in the hours after, when I sat with Solomon and told him what had happened, and he asked a question. He said, "How does it feel to have told her?" I said, "Strange, good, scary." He said, "Which part is scary?" I thought about it. The part where I asked her to be someone who comes, I said, because what if she can't? What if she tries and it's still not enough? Then you'll deal with it, he said, same as you always have. But it's different now, I said. Now I've asked, now there's an expectation. He was quiet for a moment. What's the alternative? I knew the answer before I said it. The alternative was the glass, the exact right distance without any closeness, the love without the risk of disappointment, the story where I was fine, where I didn't need anything, where I had everything handled. The alternative was continuing to betray myself by pretending I didn't need them. I'm terrified of needing people, I said. I became exactly what my mother is. I learned it so well I don't even notice I'm doing it. You're not exactly what she is, he said carefully. Pretty close. No, he said. She chose not to see it. You're sitting here seeing it, that's the difference. The noticing is everything. The betrayal and the reckoning are not the same thing as the redemption arc. Let me be careful here, because I don't want to oversimplify what is still, right now, in progress. The redemption, if that's what it is not a moment. It's not the phone call. It's not one conversation in a parking garage or one hug next to an unfinished deck. It is something much less dramatic and much more real. It is the daily, imperfect, ongoing work of being honest about what happened and what I need and what I have to give, and choosing again and again to stay in the room rather than distance myself to the point of safety. I am still in therapy. I still have the moments of bracing myself when my phone shows my mother's name. I still sometimes catch myself performing *fine when I am not fine, the old habit rising up like muscle memory. I still have nights when I think about the hospital room and feel something that is not exactly grief and not exactly anger, but a combination of them both, the specific weight of things that are not fully resolved and may never be. But I also have my mother calling on a Tuesday just to ask how I'm doing, my father texting me a photo of the finished section of the deck he completed last weekend, Solomon making coffee on a Sunday morning while I lie in bed listening to him move around the kitchen, that particular luxury of someone who stays. Cornelius's tomatoes coming in this summer, the best crop he says he's had in years, and him leaving a jar of sauce at my door with a note that says for Natalie, who keeps helping me remember why growing things matters. Isadora sending me unhinged voice memos at 7 in the morning about something she saw on the internet that she can't believe. Angie, across the Thai food table, saying you seem different lately, good different, like you've set something down. I have set something down, not everything, maybe not the most important things, but some of it. Part 11, a letter I'll never send. I wrote this once in my journal, and I'm going to share it here because it says something I haven't been able to say another way. To the person who is alone in a hospital room right now, I know you're there. I don't know your name or your room number or what you're going through, But I know you're there because there is always someone there, in every hospital, in every city, in every hour of the night, who is sitting in a room that should have more people in it and doesn't. I want you to know that the not coming of the people who should have come is not a verdict on you. I need you to understand this because I think it is the thing that is hardest to believe in that room in those hours. It is not a verdict on your lovability, your worthiness, your right to be held. It is a verdict on their capacity, their fear, their limits, their broken love if they have love at all. You are worth showing up for. You always were. The nurse who sat with me could not fix what I was losing. She could not call my husband back or put my parents in their car and drive them to me. She could not undo anything that was happening in my body or my life. She could only sit next to my bed in the 30-minute gaps between her other obligations and be there. It was enough. It was not enough, and it was enough. It was enough to carry me to 4 a.m. and the taxi and the kitchen floor and the years that followed, enough to be the standard I carry with me and try, imperfectly and daily, to live up to. Find the people who pull up the chair, keep them, feed them tomatoes if you have any, write them notes. And be the chair puller for others. The exact capacity you have is enough. Showing up halfway is not failure, it is something. Sitting for 30 minutes in the gap of someone's hardest night is not nothing. It is everything. The ripple of it goes further than you know. Part 12. What comes after? I want to tell you what happened on November 14th of this year, the 1-year anniversary of the phone call, which is also the 6-year anniversary of the hospital. I woke up early. Solomon was still asleep. The apartment was quiet. I made tea and stood at the kitchen window in the early morning dark, and I thought, 6 years. I thought about the pumpkin. I still think about the pumpkin, probably once a month, probably always. I thought about the little person who never arrived, and I let myself feel that in the way I try to let myself feel it, not quickly, not performatively, but really. A long moment of standing at the window and being sad, cleanly and without apology. Then I texted my mother, "Just hi, thinking of you, today is a weird anniversary for me, love you." She called immediately. It wasn't even 7 a.m, but she called immediately, and when I answered she said, "Tell me about it, I want to hear." And I did. My father sent a text an hour later that said, "Thinking of you today, we love you. The deck is almost done, you should come see it." It was still a little bit greeting card, but it was warm, and it was unprompted, and he used the word love without being asked. I called Cornelius. He answered in the middle of humming something. We talked for 20 minutes about nothing in particular, his tomatoes, a book he was reading, something his daughter had said on Sunday's call, and at the end he said, as he always does, "Thank you for checking in, Natalie. It does my heart good." "Mine too," I said. Solomon woke up and found me on the couch and sat down next to me and asked how I was feeling, and I told him the truth. Sad and okay both together at the same time. He nodded like this made complete sense, because to him it does, because it does. Isadora sent me an audio message, 11 minutes long, entirely unprompted, in which she talked about nothing related to the anniversary whatsoever, just things she was thinking about and wanting to say, the way she sometimes does because she understands that sometimes being loved looks like someone being present with you about ordinary things. Angie sent a link to an article about a bakery near our office that had apparently started making a particular kind of pastry she knew I liked, with a message that said, "Thursday lunch, my treat." I looked at my phone and my tea and the window and the morning coming in, and I thought about all of it, the nurse and the chair and the parking garage window, and the 5 years and the phone call, and the Sunday dinner and Cornelius's tomatoes and Solomon's coffee and Isadora's voice memos and Angie's pastry link, and my father's deck, and my mother saying, "Tell me what you need." I thought about all of it and I thought, this is a life. Not a perfect life. Not an uncomplicated or unbroken one. A life with earthquake damage in the foundations and cracks in the walls that took years to map and repair, work that is ongoing. A life that was shaped by a night in a hospital room, and the people who didn't come and the nurse who did, and all the years of figuring out what to do with the truth of it. But a life, a real one, mind. Part 13, the twist, what I didn't know until last month. I told you at the beginning that this story has an unexpected twist. I've been working up to it because it sits, for me, right at the center of everything, the thing that reframed the entire narrative in a way I wasn't prepared for. Last month my mother called. We talk more often now, not every day, not without some of the old difficulty, but more and more honestly. During this call she mentioned, almost in passing, that she had started going to a therapist. Oh, I said, trying to keep my voice neutral and not betray how significant this was. My mother, going to therapy. My mother, who considers emotional difficulty a private matter best handled with composure and a brisk walk. Yes, she said, I've been going for a few months actually, since around the time of our conversation, the big one. And I asked. She was quiet for a moment. She's been helping me look at some things I haven't looked at, she said, about how I was raised, about what I learned to do with hard feelings. Good, I said. She asked me about you, my mother said, about us, about what kind of relationship I want to have with my daughter. I held the phone a little tighter. I told her I wanted to be honest, she said. She asked me what honesty had looked like in our relationship before. And what did you say? I said it hadn't looked like much, she said quietly. Then she told me something she had never told anyone. She told me that when she lost her pregnancy before I was born, the one she had mentioned, the early one, she had been alone. Not in a hospital, not in the dramatic way I had been alone. Alone in the way of someone who is surrounded by people and still completely by themselves inside the experience. Her own mother had said something very like asterisk, these things happen, try not to dwell. Her husband, my father, had not known what to say and so had said very little. She had gone through the loss in a private interior space that she never fully left, because she never fully processed it, because she never learned that processing was something you were allowed to do. She learned instead to put things away, and she got very good at it. When I called her from that hospital room, she was not just failing to show up for me, she was, I understand this now. With the particular ache of recognizing a pattern across generations, she was enacting the only script she had ever been given. She was doing to me exactly what had been done to her, not because she didn't love me, because she had learned that love and presence were not the same thing, had been taught that love could be expressed through competence and management, and the telling of people to sleep, and she had not yet unlearned it. I sat with this for a long time after we hung up. I thought about the weather system. I thought about how the weather that forms us gets passed down. I thought about I'm the generation that stops it. And then I thought something I had not thought before. She's trying to stop it too, late, imperfect, but trying. My mother at 62, going to a therapist for the first time in her life. My mother looking at things she had never looked at. My mother calling me on a weird anniversary, not with platitudes, but with tell me about it, I want to hear. The betrayal was everywhere, mine, hers, the family's, the inheritance of patterns and silences. And the reckoning was everywhere too, happening simultaneously in multiple people, across generations, awkward and effortful and real. The twist is not that she was a villain who became a hero. The twist is that she was, like me, a person trying to become someone better than what she was given. I called Cornelius after I hung up with her. She's in therapy, I said. She is. She told me about her own loss, the one before I was born. She went through it alone. Silence on his end, then, oh. Yes. The chain of it, he said. The chain of it, I agreed. Natalie, he said with that particular gentleness of his that always lands exactly right, what do you feel? I thought about it honestly. Sad for her, I said, the 20-something version of her alone with it, and angry still a little for me, and I paused, and grateful that she's doing it now, that it's not too late. No, he said, it's not too late. Is it ever? He thought about this. I've seen people begin at 80, he said, and I've seen people die at 40 who never started. It's never too late, and it's also always the right time to start. Both. Both, I said. Both, he agreed. Part 14, what I know now. I know this, the people who fail us in our worst moments are not always our worst enemies. Sometimes they are our most complicated grief, people we cannot fully hate because we understand, with the slow, hard-won understanding of years, where their failure came from. People whose limitations are legible once we learn to read the language of inherited damage. People who love us and hurt us from the same source, from the same broken place. I know this, the people who save us are often not the people we expected, a nurse on a night shift, a neighbor below us with tomatoes, a friend at a Wednesday reading series, a patient man who calls instead of texting and waits while you arrive at trust at your own speed, a co-worker at a Thai place with good curry. These are not dramatic saviors. They are the quiet architects of a life, the people who, through the simple and radical act of showing up, made the difference between surviving and actually living. I know this, asking for what you need is not weakness. I spent years believing on some deep unexamined level that needing was the problem, that if I could just need less, feel less, want less from people, I would be safer and better and less likely to be in a hospital room alone. I built my whole post-hospital life on this premise, and it is a lie. Needing is not the problem. Needing is the condition of being human. The problem is learning to ask, and learning to ask people who are capable of answering. I know this, forgiveness is not a destination. It is not a thing you arrive at and then you're done. It is a practice like yoga or prayer or brushing your teeth, something you do repeatedly and imperfectly, and that doesn't hold its shape if you stop. I practice forgiveness of my parents, not always successfully. Some days I wake up and feel the old anger, clean and hot and legitimate, and on those days I let it be there and I don't try to forgive anything. And then when it passes, and it does pass, it passes more quickly than it used to, I return to the practice, again and again and again. I know this, the exact right distance is not a fixed point. It moves, it changes. 2 years ago, the exact right distance from my parents was a phone call once a week and holidays, and a careful management of how much of myself I offered. Today it is something closer, not without its complications, not without the occasional evening after a visit when I need to decompress and process and talk to Solomon or Dr. Adiz about something that happened, but closer. And not static, we are in motion, all of us, constantly recalibrating the distance between ourselves and the people we love, trying to find the position where love is possible and hurt is manageable and presence is real. I know this, small gestures are not small, the nurse's chair, Cornelius's tomatoes, a text that says asterisk thinking of you today, a call that happens before 7 in the morning because the person on the other end woke up and thought, she said it was a weird anniversary and I want to hear about it. These are not small things, they are the whole thing, they are everything. If you are wondering what to do for someone in pain, if you feel like you don't have the right words or enough understanding or sufficient wisdom, just pull up the chair. Just sit there. Just be present for whatever portion of time you have to give. It is enough. It will always be enough. Epilogue, the pumpkin. Last week I bought a pumpkin. This is not something I have done since that November. I have let the Halloween pumpkins sit in the stores, and I have watched them appear on other people's doorsteps, and I have felt the particular stab of it every year, every October, the pumpkin on the kitchen counter that I put there full of hope, and that was still there when I came home at 4 in the morning from the worst night of my life. Last week I bought one, a small one, orange with a slightly lopsided stem. I put it on my kitchen counter. Solomon saw it and looked at me. He knows the story. He knows what pumpkins mean. "You okay?" he asked. "Yes," I said, and I meant it. The real, complicated, imperfect, ongoing yes. I wanted to put it back, the pumpkin. I wanted to stop. I thought about how to say it. I wanted to stop letting the worst version of that night own a whole fruit. He laughed, and I laughed too. "That's fair," he said. "The pumpkin should be neutral." "The pumpkin is neutral," I said. "The pumpkin is just a pumpkin. It's my pumpkin now." My mother called that evening. We talked for 40 minutes. I told her about the pumpkin, not the whole explanation, just that I had bought one, that it was on my counter, that I was glad it was there. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, and I think she understood more of it than I expected, because she knows the story now, the full story, she said. "I think that's really good, Natalie." "Me too," I said. "I love you," she said, just like that. No segue, no particular context, just "I love you." "I love you too, Mom," I said. And I meant that too. The complicated, ongoing, still finding its way through earthquake-damaged love that we are working with, she and I, the imperfect love, the real love, the only love we have. After we hung up, I stood at my kitchen window in the dark and looked at the pumpkin on the counter. The nighttime light was catching it a certain way, making it glow a little, warm and slightly ridiculous, a small orange thing full of seeds and hope. I thought about the nurse. I thought about what Cornelius had said. The ripple of it goes further than you know. I thought about all the generations of women in my family who had stood in kitchens alone with things they didn't know how to say. I thought about my grandmother who had taught my mother that neediness was weakness. I thought about my mother, alone with her grief at 20-something, no one pulling up a chair. I thought about me in the hospital room at 29. And I thought about my mother at 62, sitting across from a therapist, learning to look at things she had never looked at. I am the generation that stops it, and so is she, late and imperfect and real. I'm 34 years old, and I have a pumpkin on my kitchen counter, and a man in the other room who makes coffee on Sunday mornings, and a neighbor below who grows tomatoes and talks to them, and a friend who sends 11-minute voice memos about nothing, and a coworker who knows the good pastry places, and a therapist who asks the questions that land like keys, and a mother who is learning to ask what I need, and a father who sends photos of his deck. I am not fine, I am not healed, I am not done. I am building. And the building, Cornelius was right, is worth looking at. If you made it to the end of this, thank you. That means more than you know. If any part of this is your story too, if you have been alone in a room where you shouldn't have been, if you have people who failed to show up, if you have spent years performing fine when you were not fine, I want you to know, you're allowed to say it. You're allowed to still be carrying it. You're allowed to love the people who failed you and still be furious about the failure. You're allowed to grieve the people you lost, and the people who are still here, and the versions of yourself you couldn't protect. You're allowed to be in the middle of it, wherever the middle is for you. And if there is a nurse in your life, someone who pulled up the chair when they could have walked away, please tell them. Or just hold them in your heart. They probably don't know what they gave you. They rarely do. The ripple of it goes further than they know. Edit, I was not expecting this to resonate with so many people. I've read every single comment. I can't respond to all of you, but I've read you. To everyone who told me about your own hospital nights, your own pumpkins, your own nurses, I see you. You're not alone, you never were. Edit 2, for those asking, yes, things with my parents are ongoing, imperfect, and genuinely better. My mother finished her first full year of therapy last month. My father finished the deck. I haven't told them about this post, and I don't plan to. This one was for me, and I guess for you. Edit 3, the nurse, I've tried in the years since to find out who she was. I never did. If by some impossible chance you work a night shift at a hospital in my city, and you once sat with a patient who was alone on a November night, it was me. Thank you, I think about you all the time.